He looked like the perfect doctor, gentle, soft-spoken, even resembling Santa Claus. Women trusted him with their most vulnerable moments. But behind the closed door of his exam room, he was hiding one of the darkest secrets in American medical history. For decades, he preyed on patients inside one of the nation's most prestigious hospitals, while everyone around him stayed silent. How did he get away with it for so long? And how did the truth finally come crashing down? Before we dive deeper into this chilling case, if you love true crime stories that reveal the darkest corners of human nature, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Robert Hadden was born in 1959 on Long Island, New York. From his earliest days, life was stacked against him. He was born blind in one eye and partially deaf in one ear. Children mocked him relentlessly. He was excluded, ridiculed, treated as the outsider. Home was no safer. His mother was an alcoholic, often passed out or coldly detached when sober. His father was absent most of the time, and when he was around, he was emotionally distant and unsupportive. But the deepest wound came when Robert was just 11 years old. His older brother, William, began molesting him. Whenever their parents were gone, the abuse would happen. Robert had no one to turn to, no one who would protect him. He became invisible at school, quiet and withdrawn. At home, however, he took on the role of caretaker. He cleaned up after his mother's binges, poured alcohol down the sink, and even stepped in to stop fights between his parents. Despite her neglect, Robert's mother sometimes told him, "You're smart, Robert. You'll be a doctor someday." For a boy desperate for approval, her words became a mission. But the chaos only grew worse. His sister turned to alcohol, his brother to drugs and crime. When Robert was 15, his mother disappeared for weeks, returning with bandaged wrists after a suicide attempt. Robert internalized her pain, blaming himself, convinced that somehow he had failed her. Determined to prove himself and perhaps to earn the love he never received, Robert pursued medicine. He studied in Florida, slowly building his career. During this time, he met Carol, the woman who would become his wife. They had 2 children together, Emily and later Alex. But once again, tragedy struck. Alex was born with a severe disability that required round-the-clock care. Robert took on the role of primary caregiver while also supporting his chronically ill wife. To outsiders, he looked like a man of remarkable strength and devotion. Inside, however, the unresolved trauma of his childhood still simmered. By his early 30s, Robert had achieved what once seemed impossible. He became an obstetrician gynecologist at Columbia University's Irving Medical Center in New York City, one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. He had finally made it. The boy who once felt invisible was now Dr. Hadden, respected by colleagues, loved by patients, admired by neighbors. But the mask he wore concealed something far darker. In the early 1990s, during what should have been a routine exam, a nurse assistant named Terry was in the room with Robert and a patient. The checkup ended. The patient sat up, and Terry stepped out to grab paperwork. When she returned moments later, she opened the door and froze. The patient was still lying back on the table, covered with a sheet. Robert stood beside her, one hand moving under the sheet in a way that had no medical purpose. His eyes were closed, his face flushed, his body trembling. Terry knew instantly what she was witnessing. But instead of confronting him, she panicked. Afraid no one would believe her word against a respected doctor's, she quietly shut the door and walked away. Her silence gave Robert freedom, and Robert knew it. From that point forward, Robert perfected a system. He targeted the vulnerable, young women visiting a gynecologist for the first-time mothers, or women who seemed timid and inexperienced. He crafted an image of safety. He was gentle, soft-spoken, always willing to listen. He told stories about his wife and children to appear trustworthy. Sometimes, he gave patients his personal phone number, telling them to call anytime. Once trust was secured, he crossed boundaries slowly. A lingering touch disguised as part of the exam. An invasive act explained away with medical jargon. If a patient questioned him, he reassured her that it was standard. If she left and never came back, it didn't matter. There were always more patients. It was a system that allowed him to offend again and again, shielded by the very trust that patients placed in him. Years later, when survivors came forward, their accounts revealed the horror of his methods. A 16-year-old pregnant girl described how Robert's exam was unusually long and painfully rough. She complained to Columbia University, but her words were dismissed, passed from office to office until she gave up. Another patient, even younger, remembered being ordered to get on all fours during her exam, something with no medical purpose. Robert groped her, humiliated her, and told her it was routine. A 15-year-old student recalled how Robert asked invasive questions about her relationships with boys, complimented her appearance, and when the nurse stepped out, had her undress. Nurses began noticing too. They whispered about his behavior, uneasy but unsure how to act. One nurse, Rosalina, saw him touch patients in ways that were clearly unnecessary. Another said he constantly asked her to step out of the room, a violation of protocol. The most shocking story came from a nurse who later became his patient during her pregnancy. During her exam, Robert rubbed his aroused genitals against her hand. Shaken, she reported him to an administrator. The response? A shrug. Everyone seemed to know. No one stopped him. By the mid-2000s, Robert had been offending for more than a decade. On average, he saw 25 to 40 patients a day, thousands each year. Investigators would later estimate that his victims numbered in the hundreds, perhaps more than 1,000. Some stayed under his control for years. Sarah Stein, raised in a conservative family, trusted him for 12 years. During that time, he assaulted her more than 60 times. Emily Anderson trusted him so deeply that even after moving to Nevada, she flew back to New York just to continue seeing him. Robert even manipulated patients with prescriptions, dispensing birth control pills in small amounts so they would be forced to return again and again. By 2007, complaints against Robert were piling up. Nurses described his methods as improper. Patients questioned his exams. But Columbia University had no clear system for documenting complaints. Reports were lost, ignored, or buried. On paper, Robert's record remained spotless. That same year, patient Charlotte Brooks fled his office in shock after one of his assaults. But like so many others, she told no one. Meanwhile, Robert escalated further. He began preying on women even in maternity wards, exploiting them during childbirth. Sometimes without gloves, sometimes with his tongue. It was no longer subtle, it was brazen. And yet he still wasn't stopped. For nearly 2 decades, Robert Hadden hid behind a white coat and a smile. Hundreds of women were left scarred, while Columbia University continued to look the other way. But in 2012, one woman's courage would finally break the silence. Her story would spark a chain reaction, pull back the curtain on a massive cover-up, and prove that even the most respected institutions can protect monsters when reputation is on the line. It was 2012 when everything began to change. One patient, a woman named Lori Kahick, was 8 months pregnant. She'd had chosen Columbia University Medical Center because she wanted the very best care. Like so many others before her, she initially trusted Dr. Hadden. At first, his gentle voice and patient demeanor put her at ease. But soon, little things made her uncomfortable. During exams, his hands lingered in ways that didn't feel right. He pinched her breasts, touched her unnecessarily, sometimes even pressed his body against hers. She brushed it aside, trying to convince herself it was nothing. Her focus was on her pregnancy, on delivering a healthy baby. But one day, after giving birth, everything became clear. During a routine checkup, Robert leaned down between her legs. She suddenly felt something wet and unfamiliar. When she looked up, she realized the horrifying truth. Dr. Hadden was performing oral acts on her under the guise of a medical exam. Lori froze in shock. Then, as he tried to justify himself with nervous excuses, she texted her partner. The message was simple but devastating. "My doctor just assaulted me." That text set everything in motion. Lori's partner called 911. Police quickly arrived, took her statement, and arrested Dr. Hadden that very evening. It seemed, finally, the nightmare was over. But incredibly, within days, Robert was released. By Tuesday, he was back at work. Columbia University allowed him to continue seeing patients, despite knowing what he had been accused of. Their only precaution? Requiring that Robert not be left alone with patients. It was shocking. A man accused of sexually assaulting a woman during an exam was back in the same hospital, still wearing the same white coat, still walking the same hallways. The truth was becoming clear. Columbia wasn't protecting patients. They were protecting their reputation. Among Robert's many patients was a woman named Evelyn Yang. She was 7 months pregnant when she saw him. Like others, she trusted him at first. But during exams, he touched her inappropriately and crossed boundaries that left her unsettled. At the time, Evelyn was the wife of entrepreneur Andrew Yang, who would later run for president of the United States. Years later, as the Me Too movement swept across the country, Evelyn made the brave decision to share her story publicly. In a CNN interview, she revealed that she too had been one of Robert's victims. Her courage brought national attention to the case and encouraged many more women to come forward. What had once been whispered in private was now headline news. But years before Evelyn spoke publicly, something else had happened. Something that enraged victims. After his 2012 arrest, Robert faced investigation. Dozens of women gave statements about what they had endured. The case seemed strong. But then, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, led by Cyrus Vance Jr., made a deal. Robert Hadden would plead guilty to 1 felony and 1 misdemeanor. In exchange, he would avoid prison entirely. No jail, no trial, no true accountability. He was required to give up his medical license and register as a sex offender, but only at the lowest level. That meant his name wouldn't even appear on public notification lists. For the women he violated, it was a slap in the face. Robert had assaulted hundreds, perhaps thousands of patients, and yet he walked free. Why? Some pointed to Robert's powerful lawyer, a man with close ties to the district attorney. Once again, the system had protected the predator instead of the victims. As lawsuits mounted, an even darker truth emerged. For years, Columbia University had known about complaints against Robert. Nurses had warned administrators. Patients had filed reports. Yet nothing was done. Instead of removing him, the institution buried complaints, deleted emails, and kept his personnel file spotless. Why? Because Columbia feared scandal. The reputation of one of America's top hospitals mattered more than the safety of women. Eventually, lawsuits revealed the depth of the cover-up. Columbia had enabled Robert's abuse for decades, sacrificing countless women to protect its image. For a long time, many of Robert's victims suffered in silence. Some tried to forget. Some were too ashamed to speak out. But after Lori and Evelyn shared their stories, something changed. One by one, more women came forward. First dozens, then hundreds. Eventually, over 500 women revealed they had been assaulted by Dr. Hadden. Their stories, though unique in detail, followed the same chilling pattern: trust, manipulation, violation, and silence. Together, these women began to fight, not only against Robert, but against Columbia University itself. The plea deal had protected Robert from being tried again at the state level. But federal prosecutors found another way. They argued that Robert had used his position at Columbia, a federally funded institution, to lure women across state lines for appointments. This opened the door to new charges that carried serious prison time. In 2020, federal authorities indicted him. Finally, after decades of silence and cover-ups, Robert Hadden would face a real trial. The courtroom became a place where women's voices were finally heard. Survivor after survivor took the stand, recounting in heartbreaking detail what Robert had done to them. Some were young girls at the time. Some were pregnant women. All described the same sickening tactics: how he earned their trust, how he crossed boundaries, and how he convinced them it was normal. Listening to the testimony, it became impossible to deny the scale of his crimes. The jury didn't take long to decide. In 2023, Robert Hadden was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to the maximum penalty, 20 years in prison. For the first time, the man who had hidden behind a white coat for decades would face consequences. Columbia University eventually agreed to pay $230 million in settlements to victims. It was one of the largest payouts of its kind in history. But no administrators were criminally charged. No one at the hospital who had enabled Robert's behavior faced consequences. The women had won a measure of justice. But the system that allowed Robert to offend for decades still remained largely untouched. Today, Robert Hadden sits in prison. He is no longer a doctor, no longer free, no longer able to harm women. But for his victims, the scars remain. Many struggle with trust, intimacy, and lasting trauma. Their courage, however, ensured that his crimes would not stay hidden. Their stories forced America to confront an uncomfortable truth: that even in the most respected institutions, predators can thrive when silence, power, and prestige protect them. Robert Hadden's story is not just about one man. It is about the power of trust and how devastating it can be when that trust is betrayed. For decades, he wore the mask of a kind, gentle doctor. Behind it was a predator who destroyed lives. And for decades, the people who should have stopped him, the administrators, the colleagues, the system itself, looked away. But in the end, it was the voices of survivors that brought him down. Their courage turned whispers into headlines. Their unity turned shame into strength. And their determination ensured that Robert Hadden, the doctor who betrayed hundreds of women, will never walk free again. If this case moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us bring more awareness to stories like these. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next true crime story we uncover. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.